The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was close to midnight when a young man was driving home along a lonely highway. The road was silent except for the steady hum of his car. The fog hung thick over the ground, and the dim streetlights flickered weakly as if they were about to die out. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the uneasy silence and the static from his radio made the journey feel endless. As he drove further, he suddenly noticed a figure standing by the roadside. It was a young girl, wearing a long white dress, her hair falling over her face. She appeared lost and vulnerable, her shoulders trembling as though she was cold. The man slowed his car and pulled over, leaning out of the window to ask if she needed help. Without saying much, she nodded and quietly slipped into the back seat. The atmosphere inside the car instantly changed. A chill filled the air, and he could see his own breath as he tried to adjust the heater. Attempting to start a conversation, he asked for her name and where she lived. In a faint, whisper-like voice, she gave him an address nearby, but kept staring out of the window, never turning her face toward him. As he approached the address, he turned to reassure her they had arrived, only to realize the seat was empty. Shocked, he stopped the car and searched, but there was no sign of her. Heart pounding, he walked to the house at the given address and knocked on the door. An elderly woman opened it, and when he described the girl, her face turned pale. In a trembling voice she told him, "That was my daughter. She died in a car accident on this road 10 years ago." Terrified, the man rushed back to his car. He started driving away as fast as he could, but in the rearview mirror he caught one final glimpse, the same pale girl, sitting in the back seat, smiling eerily as the screen of his mind went black. The Crying Baby in the Woods. It was a cold autumn night when a young camper sat by his tent, listening to the crackle of his fire. The forest around him was silent, the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound louder. Suddenly, he heard something faint, so soft he almost thought he imagined it. It was the sound of a baby crying. At first he froze. A baby? Out here, in the middle of the woods? The sound came again, this time clearer, echoing faintly between the trees. Against his better judgment, curiosity and concern pushed him to grab his flashlight. With hesitant steps, he followed the sound deeper into the forest. The crying grew louder but always seemed just out of reach. His flashlight cut through the trees, casting eerie shadows that moved with every step. The camper called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response, only the cry, thin and heartbreaking, pulling him further and further away from his campsite. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the crying suddenly stopped. The silence was heavy, suffocating. He stood still, his breath visible in the cold air, straining his ears. That was when he noticed the ground beneath him. Strange tracks, not of a child, but of an animal. His heart raced as he realized something was very wrong. Out of the corner of his eye he saw movement. Between the trees, two glowing eyes were fixed on him, unblinking. He shined his flashlight toward it, but the figure was gone in an instant. The forest seemed to close in around him, pressing him with darkness. Panic surged, and he turned to run back toward camp. But just as his feet pounded the earth, the sound returned. The baby's cry, this time much closer. He realized with horror that it wasn't coming from ahead. It was coming from right behind him. The haunted hotel room. It was a stormy evening when a weary traveler stopped at a small roadside motel. The neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing in the rain. Inside, the receptionist handed him a key with an unusual warning. "Don't open the closet in your room." The traveler chuckled nervously, assuming it was a joke or some kind of old superstition. When he entered the room, it looked ordinary: plain bed, a small desk, a mirror on the wall, and a closet in the corner. For a while, everything seemed normal. He unpacked, showered, and lay on the bed, trying to relax. But then, faint scratching sounds began coming from the closet. At first he ignored it, convincing himself it was just rats or old wood creaking. The noise grew louder, more deliberate, like fingernails dragging slowly against the wood. His curiosity gnawed at him. The receptionist's warning echoed in his head, but he could no longer resist. With trembling hands, he approached the closet. Slowly, he turned the handle and pulled the door open. Inside hung a single blood-stained dress. The fabric was old, torn, and damp as if it had never dried. A suffocating cold filled the room. His flashlight flickered, and the mirror above the desk suddenly cracked with a loud snap. In the broken reflection, he saw not himself, but a woman's pale face with hollow eyes staring back. Before he could react, the closet behind him groaned open wider. Ghostly hands, long and skeletal, reached out, clutching his arms with icy strength. He screamed, struggling to break free, but the hands dragged him into the darkness of the closet. The next morning, the room appeared untouched, the bed neatly made, the closet closed. The receptionist calmly handed a new key to another unsuspecting guest, repeating the same chilling warning. Don't open the closet. The cursed mirror. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Emily, a young art student, wandered into a dusty flea market on the edge of town. Among the piles of forgotten trinkets and antiques, she discovered an old, ornate mirror. Its frame was carved with strange, twisting patterns, and though the glass looked slightly foggy, she felt an odd pull toward it. Ignoring the vendor's cryptic warning, "Some things are better left unseen," she bought it and took it home. That night, Emily set the mirror up in her bedroom. As she brushed her hair, she noticed something strange. In the reflection, her arm seemed to move a second later than it should. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and laughed nervously, convincing herself she was just tired. But the strangeness continued. When she leaned closer, her reflection's lips curled upward into a grin. Though her own face was still and serious, her heart pounded. She stepped back, yet the reflection leaned forward, closer to the glass. The room grew colder, and her lamp flickered weakly, plunging shadows across the walls. Terrified, Emily turned around, hoping to see someone behind her, but the room was empty. When she looked back, the reflection was no longer copying her movements at all. It tilted its head, smiled wider, and lifted its hand against the glass. Suddenly, the mirror rattled violently. Before she could run, a pale hand burst through the surface, grabbing her wrist with icy strength. Emily screamed, struggling to break free, but the reflection yanked harder. With a final pull, she was dragged into the glass, vanishing into the dark void inside. The next morning, her apartment was quiet, her belongings untouched. The mirror stood calmly in its corner, the glass now perfectly clear. And if anyone looked closely, they could see Emily's face, trapped inside, silently screaming. The whispers in the dark. It was past midnight when Daniel, a university student, stayed late in the old campus library to finish his assignment. The building was nearly empty, and the silence was so heavy that even the sound of his pen scratching on paper seemed too loud. As he packed his books, he suddenly heard it, a faint whisper. At first, he thought it was the wind sneaking through the cracks of the tall windows. But then the whisper grew clearer, forming broken words. "Daniel, look!" His stomach tightened. The library had been locked from the inside. There was no one else there. He forced himself to ignore it, but as he walked past the shelves, the whispers followed, rising and falling like voices hiding between the books. His flashlight beam trembled in his hand as he pointed it toward the rows of dusty volumes. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the far end of the hall. Heart racing, Daniel crept closer and found an open book lying in the middle of the floor. Its pages fluttered, though there was no wind. On the open page, a single sentence was scrawled in red ink. "You shouldn't be here." Fear gripped him and he turned to run, but the library seemed endless, the exit farther than before. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into screams, until they formed a chorus of voices calling his name. His ears rang, his vision blurred, and then he saw them. Figures standing between the shelves, pale and faceless, pointing at him. Daniel stumbled toward the door, his hands shaking as he tried to unlock it. Just as he pulled it open, the whispers stopped. Silence returned. Breathing heavily, he dared to glance back. The library was empty. The faceless figures were gone. But the book still lay open on the floor, its pages turned by invisible hands. The last line read, "We'll follow you home."
The man at the window. It was a rainy evening when Sarah sat alone in her small apartment, scrolling through her phone. The streets outside were quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic tapping of raindrops against the glass. She was about to make tea when she noticed something strange. A tall figure standing across the street, staring directly at her window. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was just a passerby waiting for the rain to stop. But when she looked again, the figure hadn't moved an inch. He stood completely still, his head tilted slightly, as though studying her every move. A chill ran down her spine. Trying to ignore him, Sarah closed her curtains and turned up the TV. But minutes later, curiosity gnawed at her. Slowly, she peeked through the fabric. The man was still there, closer now. His pale face was faintly visible under the flickering streetlight, with eyes too dark and hollow to be human. Her hands shook as she locked the door and all the windows. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling through the cracks. Then came the knock. A slow, deliberate knock on the glass of her living room window. She froze, her heart pounding. Gathering courage, she whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, only another knock, louder this time. Against her better judgment, she pulled the curtain aside. The window was empty. Relieved yet unsettled, she stepped back, only to feel cold breath on her neck. Slowly, she turned, her stomach dropping. The man wasn't outside anymore. He was inside, standing inches away, his grin stretching unnaturally wide. Sarah screamed, but the storm swallowed her voice. By morning, the apartment was silent. The window stood open, rainwater pooling on the floor. Sarah was gone, leaving only muddy footprints that ended at the glass.
The last phone call. It was nearly midnight when Ethan's phone rang. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar, but something about it made him uneasy. Against his instincts, he answered. At first, there was only static, like a radio caught between stations. Then came a faint voice, a woman whispering his name. Ethan. The sound was distant, broken, as if coming from underground. His skin prickled. "Who is this?" he asked, but the line went dead. Shaking it off as a prank, he set his phone aside. Minutes later, it rang again, the same number. This time the whisper was clearer. "I'm outside." Ethan's blood ran cold. He jumped up, checked the window, but the street below was empty, washed in the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. Trying to calm himself, he locked the doors and returned to bed. But the phone rang again. His hands trembled as he answered. The whisper came sharper now, closer. "I'm at your door." His heart pounded violently. Slowly, he crept toward the front door, every step heavy with dread. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Gathering courage, he peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Relief washed over him, until the phone buzzed once more in his hand. This time, the voice was right behind him. "I'm inside." Ethan spun around, but the room was empty. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the floor. The screen lit up one last time, showing his own number calling him. His breath caught in his throat. The static roared louder, and through the phone's speaker came his own voice screaming. Then silence. The next morning, neighbors reported hearing a terrible cry, but when police entered Ethan's apartment, it was empty. His phone lay shattered on the ground, the call log frozen on one number, his own.